Welcome to IVF This, episode 32, Catastrophizing. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. I'm a mother to two beautiful and feral boys. I'm married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hello, my beautiful friends, and welcome back to the podcast. Before we get into this week's topic, I wanted to give you a little bit of an update on my own IVF journey for round number 2. A few weeks ago, I mentioned that we had completed our latest round and we had sent 3 little M babies off for genetic testing. Well, of the 3, we had one come back as chromosomally normal, and it's a little girl. We're honestly in shock, right? I've talked a lot before about our odds were not great due to my age, mutual fertility diagnoses, but just having this one more little shot is truly, truly amazing. So this week, the week I'm recording this episode, I'll have my baseline ultrasound to get my frozen embryo transfer started. We're hoping that we could have our transfer within the first 2 weeks of July. That might be a little bit later, but whatever. And then the prayers, wishes, good vibes, warm thoughts that the transfer will stick and we'll get pregnant and welcome another little person into our family. And yes, I've already started noticing little mommy and me dresses, outfits, and my best friend keeps sending me tiny little lemon baby outfits. And in a stroke of what I do believe to be God's reassurances, because I do have a very strong faith story for myself and my family, I was cleaning out a sock drawer the other day and I found a little girl newborn outfit that we had purchased when we were pregnant with our first. We did not find out the gender the first time because I had always wanted to do that. I'd always wanted it to be a surprise. And so in that surprise, we bought a little boy going home outfit and a little girl going home outfit. I was sure I had lost it in the couple of cross-country moves we've done over the last few years, but we did not. And it was still there, perfectly intact, at the back of my sock drawer. Its placement in that particular drawer is beyond me, but who am I to question it, right? So that's it for us. Our latest round, our last round. Hopefully in the coming weeks of the podcast, I'll have a few more updates to share with you all. But on to the topic at hand. Catastrophizing. This might be one of the most common things that I notice my clients doing. Some of it is glaringly obvious and some of it is a little bit more subtle, but everyone does this, right? Even your coach. When I worked in corporate healthcare and I had a team of people under me, I would call these moments, the catastrophizing scenarios, as hair on fire moments, like you're running around like your hair is on fire. Some people talk about it like running around like a chicken with your head cut off. These are just descriptors, but what is happening is catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is the habit, yes, it is a habit, of imagining all of the potential future negative scenarios that could happen. When you do this, your brain begins to react as though they are actually happening. That's why when we start to imagine things that could go wrong, it feels so real. It feels like it's actually happening, or it feels almost like a prophecy that will come to pass. I see this with so many of my clients around like failed cycles, failed transfer, miscarriage, the idea of having multiples, getting medications mixed up, like dosage, timing. Not that they've actually done anything, but imagining something happening. Not eating the quote unquote right diet, not taking the quote unquote right supplements. Like this comes up so often. It's hard to just give a few examples for the sake of time. It can come up outside of IVF. Your boss says they want to talk to you and your brain goes, oh my God, I'm about to get fired. Then I can't pay my bills. And then I'm living out on the streets. You get into an argument with your partner and all of a sudden it's, we're going to break up. I'm going to have my kids alone and I'll probably die alone. My best friend, who I love so dearly, is like a master ninja at this. She can go from, I got frustrated with my kiddo because he spilled something, all the way down to him being an adult and on a therapist's couch recovering from the trauma of his incredibly loving and dedicated mother yelling at him for dropping a bowl of Fruit Loops. As always, I like to interweave these things between IVF and the other parts of our lives because I truly believe that how we do one thing is how we do all things. And all of us catastrophize in every area of our lives from time to time. Again, I really want to emphasize this about catastrophizing is that when you do this, your brain does not know the difference between a real threat that is external to you, like a catastrophe, and the perceived catastrophe that is going on in your mind. It genuinely cannot tell the difference. It interprets it all the same. Your brain only knows what you tell it. So when you're catastrophizing, you're telling your brain that you are not safe. And so your brain, doing exactly what it's supposed to do in moments when it thinks safety is at risk, dumps out all of the adrenaline and cortisol, which then reinforces to your brain and your body that whatever it is you're thinking is actually happening to you. The part of the brain that controls this, your limbic system, specifically your amygdala, is responsible for these fight, flight, or freeze hormones. And so when we are catastrophizing, we are actually engaging that very primitive part of our brain that has kept us alive for thousands and thousands of years. Any and all of this can happen while you're sitting at your desk at work, lying in bed, while you're snuggling on the couch, because it's all happening in your brain. This is, again, why these scenarios are so incredibly powerful for us. That's why we feel so visceral, like so real, so true. Because to your brain, it is true. Isn't that so incredibly fascinating? I mean, I think it is. That's why our thoughts are so powerful. We can actually trick our brains into believing we are in danger. How many of us when we were kids would get freaked out running out of a dark room, like actually to the point where we would feel something behind us? That is the power of our thinking. I think that there are lots of reasons why we do this catastrophizing. For some of us, it maybe comes from our family of origin. Maybe our parents are the worst case scenario people. Maybe you grew up in a household of having scenarios like this verbalized to you, and so it was never anything other than second nature. Some of it could be cultural influences, like actual cultures that tend to have a stronger cultural predisposition for this. There are professions that lean heavily into this. I'm thinking medicine, law, engineering, things like that. Things where all angles must be intensely interrogated to avoid injury or malpractice or something like that. All this to say is I want to normalize that this is something all of us do, whether it's because of how we are raised or whatever. It's not your fault if it happens and when it happens. We just want to be aware that it is happening, that there are steps that we can take to get our logic brain back in the driver's seat. So there are some schools of thought that talk about offering your brain reassurances when you're experiencing this. And I don't necessarily ascribe to that. I think most of the time when we are in the throes of catastrophizing, it's almost lip service to offer your brain reassurances. Now, I'm not saying that by doing that, you're doing it wrong. I don't believe there are rights or wrongs to this stuff. I'm just not sure that it's the most effective mechanism for calming that particular part of your brain down. I will say that if you're experiencing genuine panic, that is not the time to do cognitive work. If you absolutely cannot focus because the emotions that you're experiencing are so powerful, then you need to utilize some grounding techniques before you move on to more cognitive aspects that I'm about to talk about in a minute. I'm going to give you a few examples of grounding techniques to help you really, when in a heightened emotional moments, to help ground you. This is by no means an exhaustive list, mind you, but these are some techniques that I use when I'm experiencing a lot of anxiety or panic or something like that. My favorite one, probably the one that I utilize most personally, as well as like with my children, is the countdown. So I want you to name 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. You can mix all that up with colors or anything else, like 5 things that are blue, 4 things that are yellow, 3 things that are green, and so on, right? It's a really amazing technique because it's pretty universal. Most everyone can identify either if you're using colors or senses or something like that. But it really is important to go down in the counting. That is the most effective part of the grounding technique, is that you're counting down. The next 2 are more tactile ones. Take your shoes off, go to a patch of grass, backyard, front yard, sidewalk, whatever, and stand in the grass for a few minutes, allowing yourself the opportunity to feel the grass on your feet and reconnect from there. Even taking a few minutes to describe what you are feeling from your feet, from the grass, from the soil, from whatever, describing that to yourself as a way to reconnect. Running cold water over your hands for a couple of minutes can also ground you. Now, if you lean more towards conservationist, it's totally fine. Fill up a bowl of cold water and put your hands in there. Now, if you go on Pinterest and search grounding techniques, you'll find hundreds of options to choose from. I wanted to talk about this because I think for a lot of us, we just want to fix whatever it is we are feeling. So we try to think our way out of it. But that isn't going to be effective if you're still deeply locked into that fight or flight instinct. So that's why taking a few minutes to ground yourself if you're feeling really overpowered by an emotion is a great way to recenter and then move on to more cognitive work. All right, so now the cognitive work. I mentioned earlier that I think sometimes offering your brain reassurances can sometimes be lip service, and let me tell you why. When you tell yourself a reassurance like it's okay or it will be okay, it doesn't really quiet down the part of your brain that is screaming, but what if it isn't? But what if it doesn't get okay? Right? You're not actually stopping or calming the brain, but you're unknowingly perpetuating that spin cycle that we get caught in. My suggestion is to allow yourself to go down the rabbit hole. I've talked about this concept of giving your brain equal airtime, and this is another great example of what that looks like. Your brain will always stop you at the part that it thinks it is the scariest, which is usually the unknown, right? That's where our brain tends to be the most afraid because our brain likes processes and procedures. It likes to know what to do. So it's going to want to get stuck on the scariest part. So let's take one of these scenarios that I described at the first of the episode. The question of what happens if my transfer fails? Most of us will stop ourselves at something like, I don't know how I would handle that. I don't know what I would do. I don't think I'll ever be happy again. I don't know if I could keep going. What if I fall into the grief hole and I'm never able to get out? By the way, these are real things that either I have thought myself or have had clients tell me. Play that scenario out as fact-based as you can. It's the morning of the beta, you do the blood test, then you get the call, you hear the words, I'm so sorry, but the test was negative. What are you going to do? When I posed this question to one of my clients, this is what she told me. I guess I'll cry. Maybe run a bath, drink a glass of wine, order greasy takeout, go to bed early. Yes. When she slowed her brain down for a few moments, stopping the spin cycle of I don't know, she was able to calmly guide herself through how she would grieve in that moment if her beta was negative, which we found out a few days later was, unfortunately. But when she was able to logic her way through the steps that she kept telling herself she didn't know, she found out that the other side was not so scary. Obviously, the scenario is the last thing we want to have played out, but it doesn't mean that we cannot handle what could come to pass. Break down step by step how you think you would handle or manage a given situation. You don't have to know the entire process, like down to the organic minutia level, just enough to know what that first or maybe even second step would be. It kind of reminds me of that song from Frozen 2, sung by Christian Bell, who I pray to God one day I get to meet, called The Next Right Thing. In the song, she's in the grips of despair, grief, and loss, and she is reminding herself that she doesn't have to know the exact path. In fact, that's too overwhelming for her in that moment. So she just needs to take the next step. And that's all we're talking about here. Your brain is always going to offer you, I don't know, but it's never true. If we actually stop to question, is that true? I guarantee you're going to come up with at least one or two steps that you actually do know, but your brain was blocking you because that ambiguity, that vagueness of I don't know is the scariest part. What I think you're going to find, and certainly what I have found, is that when you start doing this, your brain will calm down enough to actually believe the smaller step thoughts like, Okay, I've felt grief before. I don't like it, but I didn't fall into any kind of grief hole that I can't get out of. So then maybe that's the same thing now. Your brain might also start to realize that the terrible outcomes that you think could happen, logically, probably won't. One of my clients, she told me she was so scared about their IVF cycle failing because in her mind, the reason they had to do IVF was quote unquote her fault because she had endometriosis, and that her partner would want to leave her if they couldn't have kids together. So one, we spent a lot of time on releasing her guilt and shame around her diagnosis. And two, when we really started breaking down the intricacies of their relationship, they actually have an incredibly strong bond that superseded IVF and family planning, which is, I think, the vast majority of us in our partners. And yet that catastrophe of partner abandonment is a very real fear. But when we spent time together talking about it, she realized, oh, wait, we've actually had that conversation before. And he outright told me that nothing would change between us if we never had a biological child. And the most important thing in his life was me, whatever that looked like. But because of her catastrophizing, she wasn't even able to give space to the truth of what her partner had told her about his perspective of their relationship. But she couldn't get there until we slowed down a bit, until we played the scenario out to the worst possible outcome and what she knew to be true of their relationship. Once that happened, her brain calmed down enough about the threat to see that it was actually a very unlikely scenario and not really worth her time, energy, or peace to focus on anymore. And that is absolutely something you can utilize in any situation. A big part of mindfulness, what I teach, is being very intentional with your thoughts and actions. This is not something that comes naturally to me, to be sure. I am someone, like most of us, I would guess, that tends to get very impatient if things take too long, or I perceive it to be inefficient. When I was doing my undergrad work, I worked at Hobby Lobby as a cashier. You can say what you want, and I could say plenty, but having guaranteed Sundays off was nice, folks. Anyway, I would pride myself on how quickly and efficiently I could ring up a transaction and get to the next person and to the next person and so on. I would even have this vague sense of superiority towards other cashiers that I deemed quote unquote slower. This is obviously not a point of pride now, but I wanted to give this example because I am someone that likes to do things quickly. I dislike traffic so very much because I feel like there's other or better things that I could be doing with my time. Traffic is inefficient and therefore it's a waste of time. I have specific steps that I take when I clean or prepare food, and it's a way that I have deemed this to be efficient, effective, and therefore the best. I know I'm not alone in this, but this desire for urgency and efficiency is exactly what our primitive brains are for. That function of your brain is how and why you can do all of these things so effectively and knock out 3 or 4 work assignments in 45 minutes when it might take others double that time. So it's actually a really amazing facet of your incredible brain. It's just a little problematic when it comes to these catastrophizing scenarios because our primitive brain doesn't want us to slow down. Slowing down is inefficient, and our brains love to be efficient. That's why catastrophizing can almost feel like a cascade, like an avalanche that you feel like you can't get away from. You just get carried along. That is the part of your habit brain. It's doing what it does best. It just doesn't know that what it's doing is creating suffering. When you slow down, physically, mentally, literally, you are bypassing that part of your brain, your habit brain. And so that takes work and focus. It won't happen 100% of the time, but the more you practice it, the better you will get at it. Oftentimes, being able to notice what your brain is doing is much more helpful than the flawless execution of something. When we notice what our brains are doing, when we can catch on to its bullshit, then we know what to look for in other areas, right? Your brain is always looking for these loopholes. So even stopping to notice, whoa there, brain, we ratcheted up that fast. Okay, let's take a beat. What do we actually know? Start that conversation with yourself from there. And I promise you, you will change the outcome too. All right. That is what I have for you today, my beautiful friends. Remember, you have got this, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a great week. Bye. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.